I think we're looking at a pretty much a root and branch realignment of global powers. We're looking at an unraveling of the post-World War II global order into something else. And this seems to be, in some way, policy of the new administration in Washington. We had Secretary of State Marco Rubio during his confirmation hearings state this explicitly. He said that the post-World War II global order was more than obsolete. And he said that it was being used as a weapon against us, meaning the United States, and that we are now have to face the reality of a multipolar global order emerging, and we have to reckon with that. That wasn't, it wasn't Marco Rubio who came up with that. That's a policy statement of policy position of the new administration in Washington. I think the events that we're observing couldn't be bigger. I think we're looking at a pretty much a root and branch realignment of global powers. We're looking at an unraveling of the post-World War II global order into something else. And this seems to be in some way policy of the new administration in Washington. We had Secretary of State Marco Rubio during his confirmation hearings state this explicitly. He said that the post-World War II global order was more than obsolete. And he said that it was being used as a weapon against us, meaning the United States, and that we are now have to face the reality of a multipolar global order emerging, and we have to reckon with that. That wasn't, it wasn't Marco Rubio who came up with that. That's a policy statement of policy position of the new administration in Washington. That should have been huge and spectacular news, but I think that maybe our mainstream media still prefer to ignore a statement of this kind and pretend that it's not happening, but it is happening. And I think that we're looking at the initial stages of that. So it's hard to judge these things from day-to-day events, but from a high altitude view, this is what's going on.
Yeah, it's massive change, as you said. So why do you think it's being ignored? Is it just the fact that, I guess, let's be honest, this is maybe something that's been talked about quite a lot the last decade or two, but it seems like the US has found a way to sort of maintain control and keep, going from strength to strength. So is that what you think, or is there other reasons it's being ignored?
Well, I think it's being ignored because the world order that we've had since World War II is something that we've been hearing about until very recently as something that's the ultimate aspiration of the Western world, because this is what gave us 70 years of peace and prosperity and all these wonderful things, blah, 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 blah. And so I think that the powers that be have very, very significant vested interests in maintaining this global order as is. And I think that they're desperate into bringing the United States back into alignment with that global order. But I think that this will prove about as effective as King Canute flogging the waves to stem the tide. The writing is on the wall. And the changes that have started unfolding are irreversible. And I think that much of the Western world is not prepared for that, namely the European powers and the United Kingdom and its Commonwealth, Australia, Canada, Japan, and they do not have a strategy of who they want to be in this new global order. They just desperately want to return of the old order. I think this is why they're ignoring it, and this is why they're doing all this frenetic footwork to try to change this back to the way they were.
And do you think it's possible to sort of this trajectory to reverse, or maybe a better question is where do you think this change started? Was it sort of Afghanistan? Was it Iraq? Was it earlier? Was it later?
Well, it probably stretches back earlier, but I became aware of it with Afghanistan, namely when the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. I was very surprised. It didn't go well anywhere, but in the United States, the criticisms were mainly focused on the way the United States withdrew, that they bungled the withdrawal, that it was poorly executed. It created victims that didn't need to be created. But I was very surprised at the really hysterical reactions in Britain. And so I started wondering, what is all this about? And to me, the impression that these reactions gave is that Britain was far more invested in Afghanistan than we knew, or they were very deeply invested in Afghanistan being dominated by Western powers for whatever reason. And so this is why I started kind of paying attention to the state of affairs in the United Kingdom. And it's really difficult to tell, because I think that what we should know is being deliberately concealed from view. But when you observe the pattern of events, when you observe the policies as they evolve, when you pay close attention to the statements from the Prime Minister, from the Bank of England, then you realize that something is really, really badly wrong. And I think that the part that's wrong is that we already know that the Western financial system is absolutely starved for collateral. And, the way to be bringing new collateral into the Western financial systems is to take political control of resource-rich countries, to make sure that collateral, the resource wealth of those countries is taken as collateral into the Western financial system, and to fuel further credit growth impulses. And so if they lose political control of countries like Afghanistan and Ukraine and other places, colonies in Africa, that is, African countries that are in a neo-colonial subjugation to the West still, then they're losing control of that resource wealth. And there's a risk that as countries reclaim their sovereignty and independence, that they will be renationalizing their domestic industries and their natural resource wealth. And we see this already happening. France has virtually lost most, if not all, of their African dependencies, and I think that the same is coming the way of Great Britain.
Yeah, so it seems like this never-ending sort of trajectory. But I guess the US is different because they have quite a lot of resources, and then maybe there's this new Monroe Doctrine where they're sort of trying to collaborate with Canada and Mexico and South America, which as well is very resource rich. So is that sort of that? Do you see that as the strategy of what they're trying to do?
I think that that's potentially it, because the United States has been shouldering the bulk of the cost of maintaining the empire around the world. About 800 military bases everywhere around the world. This has a massive cost, and that cost is only benefit to the banking cartels, to the dominating banks in the system. The too big to fails. It doesn't benefit anybody else in society. So ultimately, the cost of maintaining an empire becomes more and more unbearable. And through history, every single empire has ultimately collapsed. And I think that certain part of the American political class understands this, and they understand that they will either maintain this empire and deplete their country completely, or they have to do a sharp turn and change policy. And with the Trump administration, it seems to me that they have decided to disentangle themselves from all their imperial commitments and to focus on domestic development. And they too, well, you know, the United States is a resource-rich country, so they have a much better maneuvering space than do European countries or the United Kingdom. But nevertheless, you know, the debt overhang is absolutely insane. It's unpayable. Today, the total credit market debt in the United States is something on the order of $113, $114 trillion. So total credit market debt means the public debts and the private debts together. And at the same time, the monetary base is something around just south of $6 trillion. So that's all the money in the system that's available for the payment of these debts. So if you have 20 times as much debt as you have money with which to pay it back, you have a big problem. And, you know, there are three basic ways of dealing with unpayable debts. Either you default, or you inflate it away, or you bring in new wealth into your system. You know, you go abroad and plunder it, right? And so going abroad and plundering wealth from other countries is difficult to do these days. But I think that this is part of the reason why the Trump administration is looking at bringing Canada into as the 51st state of the United States and bringing in Greenland. I think that this could probably increase the total wealth of the economy of the system. And it seems to me that the administration is dead serious about it. This is not a joke. This is not just some kind of a stun grenade that Trump throws into the public to get everybody really excited and talk about this and that. I think that they're serious about it. And I don't know how they're going to pull it off, if there's a plan, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, it's a good point about if we go back to sort of, I guess I think I've heard you talk about this before, this globalization, and you know, it's a way of, I guess, colonialization, but it's also the fact that, you know, these businesses, Western businesses, go into these countries, the capital then gets sort of taken back to these countries, and then from there, that's how they have such a high consumption, and it's creating this extremely unbalanced, I guess, world and economy as well for each of these countries.
Yeah, except that, you know, in the past, in the days of Dutch East India Company and British East India Company, these companies went there with their fleets, and they even had to build up their own troops to subjugate the local populations. But then somewhere along the way, you know, they realized that, well, it's better if we get the taxpayer to shoulder that burden, and we get the state to do all the military side of things, and we'll do the business side of things. So then you had the government troops going there to subjugate the local populations. But then, you know, the even better approach, which is what they do nowadays, is to enter in and to co-opt the local governments and to give them loans that they have to repay. And then the people who manage the local government and the local military, secret police, you know, the whole repression apparatus, they get rewarded in order to keep their own population in subjugation. And the wealth flows westwards, not only in terms of raw materials, but also in terms of repaying the debts. Because, you know, if you're gonna develop a coffee plantation in Haiti, you know, somebody's going to have to take out a loan, right, to make that happen. And that somebody is going to have to pay that loan back with interest. And so not only will coffee flow westwards, but also repayment of those loans. So, the raw materials, the produce, as well as a loan repayment all flow back to the Western financial centers. So that's, why after centuries of colonization, all these resource-rich nations of the global South are still poor. They're still underdeveloped. They still don't have nuclear power plants. They still don't have adequate infrastructure. And this is by design. This is not by accident. It's by design, because if they were allowed to use that capital domestically to develop their own industries, their own infrastructure, then they themselves might be using up their own produce and their resources at home. And they would compete with Western capital for access to those resources. So the prices of commodities would be higher. The availability of those commodities would be less than what it is now, because they would be using much of it domestically. And so for Western financial interests, part of the strategy has been to keep these nations impoverished chronically, and they have done so. That's why the state of the world is what it is.
Yeah, and then that creates, capital then benefits the most. So then the workers, I guess, of the West are the ones who get impacted. So that seems to be sort of what Trump is trying to, or says he's trying to change, and we'll see if he actually does, or if what he's doing can help.
Well, the workers in the West, they do end up getting some crumbs, but if we look at the world from World War II onwards, then it seems that we've been able to raise the standards of living in the Western world, that workers have decent wages and protections and security and decent healthcare and education and all these things. But that's not the way things are always. If you go back to Victorian England, it was miserable at home. If you go back to the United States in the 19th century, same thing. The working class is always impoverished. And if you look at the trajectory of developments today in Western Europe and Britain as well, you see the same thing. We're going back to the Dickensian kind of poverty among the working class. The middle class is disappearing, and the societies are polarizing into the ultra wealthy and the ultra poor, with very, very, very little in between.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you say, it's probably the last, I guess, from after World War II until the 80s or 90s, it's been an abnormality versus the rest of the past two millennium, basically, or longer. Well, let's hope we can go back. So back to my question that I sort of asked before, but then changed. Do you see a way for this to change? Do you think the West can sort of rise again? And yeah,
I think it could, but it would have to want to, and while the ordinary person on the street does want to, the people who are running the show are still obsessed with the idea of maintaining their empire, of maintaining their population under control and under repression. And something will break, because you see also that through the democratic process, which is to some extent still alive in the West, is being routinely rigged and manipulated and even canceled if the people end up voting for the wrong candidate. And so we have this phony managed democracy, which doesn't serve the people. Well, democracies, you would expect that they would deliver what people desire, and that they wouldn't deliver things that people don't desire, right? And what do people desire? They desire high standards of living, beautiful living spaces, beautiful cities, good education, good healthcare, safe streets, good, well-functioning infrastructure, and things like that. And they want peace. But what we end up getting is none of the good things and permanent wars, almost constant crises, deteriorating standards of living, increasingly ugly living spaces, and on and on and on. So the democracies that we have today are clearly dysfunctional. The ruling establishments are very keen on making sure it stays that way. And we've seen what happened in Romania these last few weeks. The Romanian people voted for the man who wanted to stop the march to war, who wanted to have good and peaceful relationships with his neighbors, including Russia, who didn't want to take part in Project Ukraine. And the election was basically canceled on completely contrived grounds. So there was no truth to the reasons that they gave why they, disqualified him and why they canceled the election. And then the rationale keeps shifting. Well, it's this. No, it's that. He's an extremist. No, he was, he was voted into office because he won the first round because of the Russian bots in the social media, whatever. The people are not stupid. They can see that they are being deprived of their democratic choice. And so if you do that, if you don't give the people the ability to change the system through the institutions of the system, then you're pushing them into staging violent revolutions. And you know what happened to Nicolae Ceausescu in 1989 in Romania? He was shot with his wife. I think that today Europe is moving in the direction of social revolts. And these social revolts could get very ugly. It could be like a storming of the Bastille kind of ugly. And still the people in power, either they're tone deaf or they're stupid, or they don't understand what they're playing with, and or they are counting on their ability to control everyone. So that's why I think the European Union, at the same time as they are allocating 800 billion euros that they don't have to the defense contractors for remilitarization of Europe, they're also rushing this CBDC system to be able to control everybody, so that if you go to a protest, they can cancel your account, they can block your account. If you support the wrong party, they can do the same, or you can use your imagination. They've already been unbanking people for the crime of protesting government policy. And it seems to me that they're only escalating on those mechanisms of repression. And they're also escalating on the drive to war against Russia. And so if they persist on this, we might end up having revolutionary types of movements in Europe.
Yeah, as you say, I think once people lose faith in the systems, that's the concerning period. And I think it gets to the point when there's obviously people disagree with this, but it does seem like there are uni parties where it doesn't matter who you vote in, they're all they have very similar ways of dealing with politics, etc. So it's
exactly, and you can see in the UK, you can see what happened to Andrew Bridgen, you can see what happened to George Galloway. What happened to Jeremy Corbyn. They find ways to disenfranchise them, to marginalize them, and to remove them. And then only the people who will vote with the ruling government's agenda, and by ruling government, I don't mean the people that you ostensibly elect there. I'm talking about the real power behind the throne. And Liz Truss kind of let the cat out of the bag when she said that when she was the prime minister, she found out that she doesn't wield the power that is the Bank of England and Office of the Budget Responsibility, who wield real power in the UK. Well, you can only go with this as far as you can, and at some point the system breaks. And usually the ruling oligarchies throughout history for 2,500 years in these situations, they cry barbarians at the gate, and then they get the fighting age males. They pack them off to war. They sacrifice them in large numbers. They tell people at home, well, the reason why you can't have healthcare and you can't have any nice things and your pension is gone, well, it's the Russians or it's the barbarians, whoever, whatever the designated external enemy is for the day. You get rid of the, people who could potentially be a threat to you, i.e. the fighting age males. And you start over with a blank slate, and you perpetuate the system from war to war, from crisis to crisis. And throughout this whole process, you make sure that all the wealth of the society accrues to you and your institutions.
Yeah, I'm not sure about. I guess Russia after World War I is a good example of what happens if you get into a war and then lots of young men come back who have who are armed and have been trained and are disenfranchised.
Well, not really, because the Russian Revolution was not the product of Russian men. It was a color revolution, the same type that we've seen in Georgia and Ukraine and in the Arab countries and Serbia and elsewhere. It was, Trotsky and Lenin, they were financed by Western capital. They were sent there with suitcases full of money. And then they were helped by British, Japanese, American, Czech, Polish troops to secure the rest of the country, because they just controlled the government buildings in Moscow and St. Petersburg until Western troops came in, again ostensibly to fight the Russian whites, but in reality to make sure that the Bolsheviks secured the power over Russia. So it wasn't what they taught us in school that it was. It was very, very different.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. But if we go to, what does this mean for markets? How do you see this impacting markets?
Oh gosh, the markets. Well, it's going to get bumpy for sure. I think that Western financial systems being starved for collateral means that they will have no alternative but to print money out of thin air, so based on nothing, to keep the system, to keep flooding the system with liquidity to make sure that it doesn't seize up. And if they don't prevail in Ukraine, then what is now a stagflation is going to probably turn into an accelerating inflation and ultimately hyperinflation, because you can only print so much money out of thin air for so long before people realize that the money is completely worthless, that it's just paper. We've had that, it's not unusual. There's been dozens of high or hyperinflations around the world in market-oriented economies throughout the 20th century, and they tend to have three distinct effects. One of them is that the stock markets ultimately go vertical, and the reason for that is, as people realize that the money is worthless, they try to get rid of it as quickly as they can and to invest them into real assets. And much of that money ends up plowed into the stock markets. The second effect is that the currency collapses, not overnight, but it collapses over a period of time. And the third effect is that the price of the government of government treasuries also plummets. Unfortunately for investors, it's not okay. So if the stock market's going to go vertical, well, that means that we can protect ourselves from this by investing our money into the stock markets. That unfortunately would be too easy. What usually ends up happening is that the loss of purchasing power of the currency outstrips the rise in the stock market. So people end up wiped out anyhow. The only viable, a handful of viable inflation hedges are commodity futures, farmland. That's pretty much it. That's what you have: commodity futures and farmland. More meaningful ways of protecting yourself, to be able to, for you and your family, to weather the crisis, is to cultivate community networks, people who can help each other. Because what happens when the money freezes out, when the money dies, is that your baker could go bankrupt because he doesn't have the money to pay for the flour, and he still knows how to make bread. Farmers still raise crops. People still need bread, but there's no money to pay for it. So people have to be able to invent alternative means of exchange, alternative local and regional currencies to use to keep the economy kind of lubricated enough for people to be able to procure the essentials that they need. And then you need to know who in your if you don't have money, you need to know who in your community can help you fix your computer, fix your car, fix the roof on your house, and you need to know who can help you out and whom you can help out with what you know. So cultivate, getting to know your neighbors, which, in Europe, it's not usually that much of a problem. But in the United States, people live isolated in their houses. They don't even know who their next door neighbors are. They live between the driver and between their driveways and their offices. And so it's extremely important for them to reach out, to get to know their neighbors, because sometimes it's very, very easy. You can have problems solved essentially for free, because if you need something done, maybe you don't know how to do it, but maybe your neighbor knows somebody, or he knows somebody who knows somebody who can do that for you, like that. And then people help each other out, and that can turn out to be extremely important.
Yeah, it sounds like obviously, hopefully without the financial turmoil, but I think it's a good way for, it's like the fourth turning. They say there's this, after the crash and after all the horrors, there is this good thing that comes from it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yes. But what you want to do is you want to do what you can to weather the crisis intact, to preserve some purchasing power. People shouldn't dream that they will get rich off of the crisis. The bankers will, but the ordinary people will not. But after the crisis, usually things go for really, really bargain prices. And then if you preserved any purchasing power, you can really make nice investments and do things that you wouldn't be able to do today. And then, I want to also point out, many people think that, investing in real assets, so we should invest in real estate. No, real estate also goes south. Maybe nominally it doesn't, but in real terms it does, because when the community's purchasing power is destroyed, then even if you have apartments for rent, people will not be able to pay you for that. They won't be able to afford your rent, and so and those things cost money. You have to maintain them. So commercial and residential real estate is not a hedge, but farmland is. You can actually do something. You can produce food. You can raise chickens, whatever. Produce useful things that actually help your survival.